In our last episode, I talked with Claudia del Pozo about current developments on artificial intelligence and what they mean at the policy level, from the workforce to security. I'm continuing this conversation on AI today with Laura Ripani, who represents Mexico at the Inter-American Development Bank. Previously at the IDB, she was chief of the Labor Markets and Security Division, where she worked to recover, create, and transform labor markets in Latin America. Today, we are talking about the future of work as AI advances, including emerging AI technologies and the ethical challenges posed by AI. I'm Tony Payan, Director of the Center for the U.S. and Mexico at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy in Houston, Texas. And with me today is Alejandro Dabdoub, who's been a generous supporter of the AI line of research at the center. This is México Centered. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Tony.
Well, I'll start with the first question for you. What do you think are some of the most recent development trends in the development of AI? What's coming up that we don't see yet, but you may because you're in this particular field? And how do you think these developments will impact what is of interest to this podcast, work and workers?
So what we have seen so far since around 2018, when we started to discuss more the impact of the technology on the world of work, we were mostly talking about automation and industrial robots. But now we are talking about new technologies like generative AI. So since November of 2022, when ChatGPT showed up, we started to analyze the impact of this new trend of technologies. And we are seeing in Latin America and the Caribbean specifically that the impact of generative AI is mostly on formal workers, on medium and advanced skills level workers, those who have repetitive tasks and that can be replaced specifically by these technologies. But in that sense, it's going to augment the capabilities of the workers that are in these levels of skills, but not so much replace the whole worker, like in the case of automation happened, right? So in the future, what I see is that the industries are going to start more and more adopting generative AI for industrial processes. And this is going to affect not only individual countries, but the whole global value chain, because some countries are going to take advantage of these technologies earlier than others. And so we're still waiting to see what's going to happen in Latin America and the Caribbean if they don't adopt quickly the new technologies that are showing up in the business.
More than the geographical concern, I'm also concerned about the fact that just what you said, which is formal workers, engineers and accountants and lawyers and others are going to be impacted directly. But in Latin America, in Mexico, a huge percentage of the population, 55%, 60%, is informal workers. What's going to happen to them? Are they going to be just left behind in an economy that's going to be falling further and further behind?
Yes, Tony, that's the worry, right? Because if we're talking about augmentation of or increasing productivity of formal workers, medium and high skilled workers, then the difference in terms of productivity, income between this part of the population and the poorest and the informal workers is going to increase. The worry that inequality is going to increase because of the technologies is there, and in a region that is, let's say, the winner of the world in terms of the inequality numbers, right?
So there'll be geographical winners, but there'll also be certain social segments that will be the winners.
For sure.
We're talking about the inequality is going to be so much different than it is today. What can we do, or what can business leaders do to kind of help bridge that gap? We don't want it to be so divided to where, some people talk about universal income, some people talk about different things, options to work or not to work. But what can business leaders do, or politicians, or to start making some kind of strategy to close that gap a little bit?
So I think in terms of skills development, that is a very important part of the equation, increasing the number of programs that have access for poor people or medium income people, to increase the access to digital skills training, to training in things that are going to be demanded in the labor market. And another thing that I think is important is that in Mexico, for example, 90% of the firms are medium or small enterprises, right? So sometimes what happens in the countries is that the adoption of technology is being done by large firms, right? So how we can support medium and small enterprises to acquire technology and to work with the community, work with the surroundings of the firms so they can get people with the skills they need so they can enter the firms. So it's an adoption of technology problem that we have in the region for small and medium enterprises, and also a matter of the skills of the population.
I have another question. Recently, DeepSeek essentially broke into the scene, and all of a sudden we saw that, if it is all true, 12.5 students or so, young folks with $6 million or so, developed this sophisticated open source AI tool. Does that mean something for Mexico and Latin America? Does that even the playing field a little bit more so that Latin America can say, hey, you don't need the many years of very sophisticated technology, perhaps not even the trillions of dollars that Europe and the United States are investing. It can be done. We can do it. You think that that does something to the landscape?
I think so. I think it says something, but we don't know yet, right? We don't know how this new platform is going to work out. We don't know how this platform is going to use the data, is going to impact in other parts of the society, right? But as you said, I think it's good news that we can develop a platform like this much cheaper than the previous platforms, right? And also, I think it's about time that this happened, the drop in costs of this type of technology, because in the evolution of technologies, usually you have higher costs at the beginning and then they decrease, right? Since November 2022 that ChatGPT was created, so it's more than 2 years. So if we continue seeing the decrease in price and a decrease in the water use and energy used by this type of platform, it's good news for sure. And in countries like, maybe not in all the countries in the region, but countries like Brazil or Mexico, other countries in the region can be the leaders of new technologies and the decrease in prices.
But do you still need the chips, right?
Yes.
That's a different issue.
Yes, that's a different issue. And the region, I think, is more and more interested in semiconductors and manufacturing in these areas. So I think this is something also to pay attention to. I know that Costa Rica, for example, is making a huge push for semiconductors, Mexico as well. So we'll see how this story continues.
Following what you're saying about DeepSeek, I think it's an amazing opportunity. Because whenever something disruptive happens, software races. Yeah. How could Mexico take advantage of the situation?
Yes, we are still in observation of what's happening with DeepSeek, right? Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't try to guess what Mexico could do, but for sure it's something to look up to investigate, to see how they did it, right? It's open source, so this is something that I think we could take advantage in Latin America and Caribbean of this new success, but we're still in observation. Every day we hear something else about DeepSeek, so we're still in observation phase, I think. We have to learn how they did it, and it's interesting for sure.
I think it's important how we reinvent ourselves. When something like this happens, it really means we need to go back, reinvent in the way we're thinking, and really push forward.
Yes, for sure. And something interesting that I've seen is that there are so many different platforms, apps that use LLMs at the moment. And now there is a new development that is this agent that manages or connects with the different platforms. If you don't know where to go, because the LLM platforms have different functions, you can have this type of agent that is going to lead you to the right one depending on your needs. I think it's very interesting how the technology evolves.
So we often talk about the United States evidently engaged in a war with China, so to speak, a kind of a Cold War. Technological Cold War and competition, geostrategic competition to get ahead. I don't think it's a coincidence that DeepSeek was unveiled the very day that Donald Trump took office. This is America first. This is a new nationalism in the United States. Mexico is also engaged in its own nationalistic project. But you spoke about Costa Rica, and you spoke about Brazil, and you spoke about Mexico and the Caribbean. How can we get Washington, but also other capitals in the region, to really think about cooperative developments in the AI technology and perhaps even constitute a region that can compete with Asia or Europe or other regions in the world that might be interested in this? Because at this point, we're fragmenting rather than bringing together. So how can we convince them that, hey, it's probably a good idea? Or is AI all about competition with very little room for cooperation?
I think there is room for cooperation. At the Inter-American Development Bank, where I work, we are looking at aspects of regional integration, and it includes AI in general. I think we need to have more spaces of discussion around regulations and around ethics of AI, but also in terms of being the drivers in terms of the technology, not only adoption, but creation. And for that, I think we need to use maybe multilateral institutions, the universities, civil society. I think we need more spaces of international collaboration more than competition because, as you mentioned, we need to unite to be more productive as a region. One of the biggest problems of the region is productivity. If you look at the productivity levels of countries in the region, they are stagnant or declining.
And that includes Mexico, by the way.
That includes Mexico, and that's a huge problem for the region. And I think AI could be a driver of growth and productivity.
So you mentioned ethics and values and international cooperation. You know, each culture thinks different. How possible do you think that they can actually be some kind of collaboration? Do you think the countries will align or something?
They have to have the space for alignment, but the need for alignment and the need for pushing together as a region is there. Because of the different political views of the different countries in the region, I see that some countries may unite for the same reason, with the same goal, but some others are not going to be aligned. So in that sense, we have a different picture in different parts of the region in terms of political views, and we'll have to wait and see. But the need is there. So I think we need to create those spaces of collaboration and dialogue.
Should we do something through universities, through the educational system, to align the values and ethics when they're still students?
I think so. And for example, one initiative that we have at the IDB is the Fair Luck initiative. It's about ethics of technologies in general, but mostly AI technologies. And this is something that we could use to promote the conversations.
I wonder if the capitals in Latin America, I'm talking about the countries that different, Brazil, Mexico, are looking eye to eye on this. Is it going to be another reason for intra-regional competition? Are there any serious forums that are bringing the countries together and saying, hey, we don't have to compete in this space. We can actually collaborate and benefit the region as a whole, or is it all fragmented? And I say that because you mentioned the fact that Mexico broke relations with Peru and Ecuador, and of course it has now an antagonistic relationship with Argentina and a friendlier relationship with Venezuela and Cuba. So there's a realignment of its foreign policy. Brazil seems to be doing its own thing. So how do we make a whole lot of these pieces?
I think the regional integration initiatives and the forums, like the World Economic Forum, there are some spaces where we can have these discussions about technology. I mentioned World Economic Forum because they have a huge part that is the future of work agenda. Spaces where the leaders of our nations are together putting first the goal for the region. That this is what is most important.
Now, one more question about the preparedness of Latin America to really take advantage of AI, generate it, and then take advantage of AI. What about the universities in Latin America? There's obviously many good universities in Mexico. I can think of Tec de Monterrey. I can think of UNAM, Santiago, Chile, obviously a university there in Rio de Janeiro, many different universities in Latin America. Are they really preparing their students? Are they really getting in the game and being more competitive? Are the students coming out of those universities with the right skills? What do we see in terms of what the countries are doing to prepare at least the next generation for this?
Yes, still there is a lot of work to do with universities and technical institutions because the technology evolves much faster than what they could adjust. Especially one area that is super difficult is the update of the curricula for universities. It's very slow. Even private universities, they don't update their curriculums as fast as the business are evolving and the technology is evolving. So I don't think we're there. In terms in general of the infrastructure and the teachers and the curriculum update, so we still have to do a lot in terms of how we organize technical institutes and the universities, how they update their curriculums, and how they connect with industries, businesses in general.
So I'm going to change the subject just a little bit. Yeah. For what you're doing right now, what really excites you for the next 10 years?
So what excites me? I think technology, you have to embrace technology, right? We should promote the use so we can understand the potential and expand the limits of ourselves, our businesses. And in that sense, for example, the other day I was hearing a podcast that was talking about generative AI. And they said that to understand a little bit what generative AI is about, you have to spend 10 hours using it. And not many people have used 10 hours so far, right? In that sense, when you start using it and get comfortable with the technologies, we can tell others and expand this effect, right? So this is a very interesting time in the history of the world, and we should embrace it and change and expand. But at the same time, there are other worries. So it's not only excitement, but also worries about inequality, displacement of some workers in the short term that you have to take care of at the moment. And there are not the social policies in place to support them. So there are worries, but mostly excitement about the frontiers that we can get to.
Do you think that businesses, the companies that are adopting AI into their processes, can take the place of universities and schools that are not ready to step into it by adopting the technology, but then also helping their workers to upskill, reskill, multiply their skills, retrain them, and get them into this? I mean, I think ultimately it's going to fall on businesses because they also know exactly what they want AI to do. So they know what they want the worker to do using the AI tool. And therefore, it befalls on the company's responsibility to sort of get that worker to this exact place where they need them.
Yes, totally. I would love to have more connection between industry and universities, industry and technical institutes in the region because it's the best recipe for success in technical training. For example, the dual training systems, the apprenticeship programs that happen in countries like Switzerland and Germany and the UK and France that lead this type of dual training programs are very successful because the student is not only at the university or at the technical center studying, they are also at work where they learn, they share with the directors and the trainers, and you understand why you are studying. So it's very interesting for me, the dual training system, but also there are other types of connections that you can make to make the training relevant. That's the most important thing.
So I see it's not just a matter of, okay, the universities are not doing it or not doing it right or fast enough. We're going to have to take it on. It's rather a triangle where you got the universities and then you got the companies and the workspaces and the workplaces and then, of course, the workers who will need that. So that's interesting. Thank you. It's been a pleasure to speak with you. The Judy Leigh Allen Mexico Centered podcast is brought to you by the Baker Institute Center for the U.S. and Mexico, which seeks to have a meaningful impact on the U.S.-Mexico relationship through binational policy research and solutions and by convening leaders who can bridge the world of ideas and the world of action. Special thanks to Judy Leigh Allen for her generous support of the work that we do here at this center.